Sign over 51% of your catering empire to Austin tonight. Giselle, or this wedding is over. A real family is led by a man. The music cut out mid-note. The string quartet lowered their bows. 300 of the city's most elite guests stopped breathing all at once. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes completely vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed hard against my ribs. Farah stood right in the center of the botanical glasshouse. She gripped the wireless microphone with a perfectly manicured hand. Her lips curled into a sickeningly sweet smile. She was supposed to be giving a touching mother-of-the-groom toast. Instead, my future mother-in-law was publicly holding my life's work hostage. I stood frozen under the massive floral arch. The heavy white silk of my custom gown suddenly wrapped around me like a straitjacket. I stared at the woman trying to publicly extort the business I built from absolutely nothing. My throat closed up. The air in the room grew so thin my lungs actually burned. She stood there waiting, entirely convinced I would crumble. She expected me to hand over the keys to my entire world just to avoid a humiliating scene. She looked out at the crowd of wealthy investors, socialites, and family friends, weaponizing their presence to trap me in a corner. Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to cause a scene. She thought she held all the cards. She thought my silence was the beginning of my surrender. Just 3 days before this nightmare at the altar, I learned exactly what kind of family I was marrying into. I was 31 years old. I had built a massive catering empire from a single rented food truck, yet I found myself backed against my own kitchen island like a frightened child. I had just walked through my front door after a grueling 14-hour shift. The smell of roasted garlic and industrial degreaser still clung to my hair. My bones ached from standing on hard tile floors, managing a team of 50 people through a chaotic corporate banquet. Before I could even kick off my shoes, the front door banged open behind me. Farah marched into my private sanctuary uninvited. She bypassed the living room and slammed a thick, leather-bound dossier onto the marble counter of my kitchen. She called it the Bailey Family Daughter-in-Law Rulebook. It contained 15 non-negotiable demands designed to completely erase my independence. The pages were typed, categorized, and waiting for my signature. I stared at the sheer absurdity of the ink on the page. I had to wake up at 5 in the morning every single day to cook Austin's meals from scratch. No household staff allowed, because a wife must serve her husband with her own hands. I had to cut off contact with my 3 closest single friends because unmarried women carry toxic influences that ruin traditional marriages. She demanded every bank password, every corporate ledger, and full access to my company accounts for her to manage on my behalf. Her justification was that women are too emotional to handle large sums of capital. And finally, she included a strict, absolute ban on ever speaking back to my elders, no matter the circumstance. I pushed the heavy binder back across the marble. I told her absolutely not. Her mask of civility instantly evaporated. Farah lunged across the island. She snatched the folder back with such vicious violence that her manicured nails gouged a deep trench down my forearm. Skin tore. Blood welled up instantly. She shoved me hard in the chest, sending my hip crashing into the sharp edge of the counter. I gripped the island, staring at the blood running down my wrist. She loomed over me, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You think your chief executive title means something? You are just a glorified cook who got lucky. A woman who makes money is still just a tool to serve her husband's family. I am the law in this house, and without my permission, you do not get a wedding." The front door clicked open. Austin strolled into the kitchen. I looked up, desperately waiting for him to throw her out. This was the same man who used to show up at my test kitchens at midnight. The man who whispered how proud he was of my ambition. Instead, he let out a heavy sigh of annoyance. He walked over, glanced at the fresh blood dripping down my arm, and wrapped his hand right around the wound, his fingers digging directly into my torn skin. "Your voice is too loud, Giselle," he whispered, his tone terrifyingly calm. "Mom just wants to protect our family values. Why are you so selfish over a piece of paper? Just sign it and apologize so I do not lose face." Standing at the altar 3 days later, staring at the faint scar peeking out from my sleeve. Reality locked into place. His gentle nature was a calculated con to siphon my wealth. He thought breaking my spirit would make me a permanent, obedient asset. He forgot one crucial detail. A woman who builds an empire from scratch does not break. She calculates her counterattack. Back in my kitchen, with his fingers grinding into my cut, I made a choice. I swallowed the metallic taste of blood, dropped my shoulders, and let hot tears spill down my cheeks. I played the broken bride perfectly. I choked out a pathetic apology and promised I would sign the rules. I even offered to publicly transfer 51% of the equity and promote his lazy cousin Beatrix during the wedding toast to prove my submission. Farah sneered in triumph. She walked out of my house, completely convinced she had crushed my spirit. Austin kissed my forehead, told me I was finally acting like a real wife, and followed her out the door. They had no idea they just handed me the perfect stage for a public execution. The moment their car pulled out, my tears instantly dried. I locked the deadbolt, wrapped a bandage around my bleeding arm, and opened my laptop. I had exactly 48 hours to turn my dream wedding into a beautifully orchestrated slaughterhouse. I called my event planner and changed the venue immediately. I moved the reception to the Grand Botanical Glasshouse in the center of the financial district. It featured one main entrance and heavy, reinforced doors. It was a perfectly transparent cage, designed to keep the predators locked inside with their prey. Next, I opened the master guest list and added 30 new names. I specifically invited every major investor, business partner, and country club socialite tied to the Bailey family. I packed the jury box with the exact crowd they spent their entire lives trying to impress, placing them right at the front, inches away from the devastation I was about to unleash. Then, I turned my attention to Beatrix. Austin's entitled cousin had been occupying a desk in my purchasing department for 8 months, contributing absolutely nothing, or so I thought. I called my lead corporate auditor and demanded a full sweep of the purchasing accounts. 4 hours later, the auditor slid a folder across my desk. The numbers were blindingly obvious fake vendor invoices, inflated supply orders, missing cash deposits. Beatrix was actively embezzling thousands of dollars from my company to fund her luxury lifestyle. I picked up my office phone and dialed the local financial crimes division. I forwarded the digital ledgers directly to the lead detective. The wheels of justice started grinding before my morning coffee even got cold. 48 hours later, the wedding march echoed through the glass house. Every step toward the altar was entirely purposeful. My pulse beat in a slow, steady rhythm. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind the last guest. Trap was officially locked. I walked down the aisle with my head bowed, playing the broken bride to perfection. Austin stood waiting at the altar, a smug, greedy grin stretching across his face, completely convinced he was about to inherit an empire. He reached out and took my hand. His palms were incredibly sweaty. Mine were ice cold. My stomach churned with pure disgust, but I forced a shy, submissive smile. In the front row, Beatrix was already snapping her fingers at my catering staff, barking orders at the servers like she owned them. Farah sat beside her, practically glowing with arrogance as she whispered to the wealthy socialites about how she was bringing a lowly cook into high society. They were all so comfortable, so exceptionally arrogant. They had no idea they were sitting in a room rigged with financial explosives, and I was holding the only detonator. Dinner was served. The plates were cleared. The moment arrived. Farah stepped up to the microphone, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. She told the crowd that a woman should not carry the burden of wealth alone. Then, she dropped the hammer. She demanded I sign over 51% of my company on the spot, fire my executive chef tomorrow morning, and hand his $90,000 salary directly to Beatrix. The Bailey relatives in the front row murmured their cowardly approval. Austin stood tall, waiting for my public surrender. His fingers locked around my wrist, digging into the exact spot where his mother had scratched me 3 days prior. "Stop being a brat and sign the papers. Giselle, you owe us." My eyes stayed completely dry. I ripped my arm out of his grip with so much force he actually stumbled backward. I simply took a step back, looked directly at my catering manager standing near the kitchen doors, and gave a single, sharp nod. The service doors swung open. 30 of my waiters marched into the dining room in perfect synchronization, bypassing the regular guests. They walked directly to the tables seating the wealthy investors, socialites, and elite business partners Farah had spent decades courting, placing sleek, silver cloches in front of every VIP. Farah frowned, her grip on the microphone loosening. "We did not order another course," she snapped, her voice echoing awkwardly across the silent room. I turned my back on her and faced the elite tables. "Please, open them." The guests lifted the silver domes. There was no food inside. Instead, resting on the pristine plates, were perfectly bound printed dossiers. The first page of every dossier contained time-stamped bank ledgers proving Austin's $80,000 illegal gambling debt, the exact debt he planned to bury using my accounts. The second page contained forged vendor invoices proving Beatrix's massive embezzlement. The third page contained court-approved restraining orders against Farah and Austin, citing severe abuse, complete with photographs of my bleeding arm. The silence in the glass house shattered. Whispers started instantly, rising into a deafening wave of shock. The social ruin happened in real time. A prominent banking executive dropped the dossier, looking at Austin with pure disgust. The president of Farah's country club pushed her chair back in horror. The wealthy investors Farah had tried to woo for years stared at the evidence of Beatrix's theft, realizing the Bailey family was nothing more than a ring of desperate parasites. Farah's face drained of all color. Her jaw hung open as she dropped the microphone, hitting the floor with a piercing shriek of feedback. Austin started sweating profusely, his fake alpha male persona shattering. He panicked, lunging toward the VIP tables to desperately snatch the dossiers, screaming that the documents were fake, that I was a hysterical liar. The guests physically recoiled. The banking executive swatted Austin's hand away. "Do not touch me," the man barked, his voice laced with absolute contempt. I snapped my fingers again. The glasshouse doors unlocked. 2 plainclothes financial detectives stepped inside. They bypassed the stunned guests, marched straight toward the front row, grabbed Beatrix by the arms, and snapped heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. Beatrix shrieked, kicking her heels against the stone floor. "You cannot do this! I am a Bailey!" she screamed, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal shattered loudly, spraying wine across Farah's gown. Simultaneously, 2 process servers stepped out from the shadows. They blocked Austin from reaching any more tables, shoved thick legal envelopes hard into his chest, then handed another stack to Farah. The predators were officially the prey. My absolute control over the venue and the evidence left them with nowhere to hide. They thought they could bully a cook in the privacy of a kitchen. They forgot they were dealing with a chief executive officer in a room full of sharks. Austin's knees hit the stone floor with a heavy thud. He collapsed in front of the altar, completely broken. He clasped his trembling hands together, staring up at me. The smug smirk was gone forever. Hot tears streamed down his sweaty face as he babbled pathetic apologies, begging for forgiveness in front of the very socialites he spent his life trying to impress. His cowardly enabling was finally exposed. I stared down at him, icy disgust coating the back of my throat. I gripped the heavy diamond engagement ring he bought using my company credit card. The cold metal slid off my finger. I held it in the air for 1 second. Then, I opened my hand. The ring dropped, splashing directly into a half-empty glass of champagne on the altar table. I turned my back on his sobbing face and caught the eye of my head of security. "I paid for this venue," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic room. "Escort the trash out." I picked up the heavy silk skirt of my gown and walked straight down the center aisle. The guests parted, pulling their chairs back to give me space. Nobody tried to stop me. They just watched the catering queen reclaim her throne. I pushed open the glass house doors and stepped out into the crisp evening air. My lungs expanded fully for the first time in months. I left the Bailey family suffocating in the exact public cage they tried to build for me. The destruction of the Bailey family played out over the next few weeks. Social ruin moves incredibly fast when you have zero money to cushion the fall. Within 3 weeks, the city's premier country club revoked Farah's membership. The wealthy investors she tried to woo blocked her phone numbers. She became a total pariah, forced to hide inside her house to avoid the disgusted whispers of her neighbors. Austin's creditors stopped leaving voicemails and sent aggressive debt collectors to his apartment. Without my bank accounts to drain, his illegal gambling debt swallowed him whole. His luxury car was repossessed right out of his driveway. Beatrix traded her stolen designer handbags for an overworked public defender. She sat in a county holding cell, facing felony charges and waiting for an embezzlement trial. Meanwhile, my catering empire healed at breakneck speed. Ripping out the parasitic rot changed the entire atmosphere of my business. The heavy tension vanished. My executive chef stopped looking over his shoulder, finally free from Beatrix's harassment. My staff worked with fierce loyalty, knowing their chief executive officer would burn down her own wedding to protect them. We locked in 5 massive corporate contracts and hit record profits by the end of the 3rd quarter. I did not just save my bank accounts that night, I saved my peace. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down 7 months later. I sat in the county courthouse, staring at the back of Beatrix's head. The judge delivered a merciless sentence: 3 years in a state correctional facility, with no chance of parole for 24 months, and mandatory restitution of $42,500. Beatrix openly wept as the armed bailiff led her away in a stiff gray jumpsuit. Austin filed for bankruptcy 3 weeks later. The banks moved with lethal speed, liquidating his high-rise condo, auctioning his luxury watches, and decimating his credit score. Farah desperately tried to rally her former wealthy friends to pay his legal fees, but her calls went straight to voicemail. Her church group quietly asked her to step down from the charity committee. Her reputation burned to ash. They lost their freedom, their money, and their carefully constructed social masks. 6 months later, the dust fully settled. I sat on my patio, drinking coffee and watching the morning fog roll over the skyline. My phone buzzed on the glass table. An unknown number flashed across the screen, followed by a voicemail notification. I tapped play. Farah's voice drifted out of the speaker. The venom was completely gone. She put on a masterful performance of a frail, broken elder, claiming she only ever wanted us to blend into a real family. She begged me to drop the remaining civil suits against Austin, saying blood should forgive blood, and calling me cruel for abandoning an old woman. My pulse maintained a slow, even rhythm. I took a slow sip of coffee, grounding myself in the present moment. I pressed the trash icon on the screen, and the message vanished forever. I blocked the number and set the phone face down. No screaming fits, no typed rage, just pure, absolute indifference. The tether snapped. Permanently. Later that evening, the energy inside my flagship kitchen hummed with a vastly different kind of magic. The dinner rush was over. My executive chef pulled a massive tray of herb-crusted lamb out of the oven, strictly cooked for the staff. My pastry lead popped the cork on a bottle of red wine. We pulled up metal stools around the prep tables and laughed until our ribs ached. I looked around at the people covered in flour, grease, and exhaustion. These were the people who stayed late when the supply trucks broke down. True loyalty never demands a controlling stake in your bank account. True loyalty hands you a plate of hot food after a brutal 14-hour shift and asks for nothing in return. The suffocating anxiety of the Bailey family was completely gone. In its place stood the loud, beautiful peace of a family I actually chose. Stop for a second and look at the people in your own life who claim they love you. Are you shrinking yourself right now to fit into their narrative? Narcissists like Farah operate on a terrifyingly simple logic. They view your generosity not as a gift, but as a glaring weakness. They study your kindness, looking for the exact angle to exploit. They weaponize sacred words like tradition and family unity to make you feel guilty for protecting your own borders. They want you to believe that if you do not hand over your sanity, you are the one destroying the family. But the narcissist is only half the threat. The enabler is the one who truly breaks your spirit. Austin's silence on that stage was an incredibly violent act. The enabler holds your arms down tight so the abuser can land the heaviest punch. They wear the mask of a peacemaker, but their peace always comes at your direct expense. If you take anything from my survival, burn these 3 rules into your mind. Rule number 1. The price of admission. True love should never require you to surrender your autonomy. If someone demands your resources or business as proof of loyalty, they do not want a partner. They want a hostage. Walk away immediately. Rule number 2. The silence of the enabler is a confession. Never marry someone who watches you get disrespected and asks you to lower your voice. The person who begs you to keep the peace is asking you to quietly accept abuse so they do not have to deal with the messy fallout. Rule number 3. Hope is not a strategy. You cannot love the toxicity out of a parasite. When people show they are willing to humiliate you for $1, believe them the first time. Stop waiting for apologies that will never come. Secure your assets, pack your bags, and let their fragile kingdom burn. Society conditions women, especially successful ones, to soften our sharp edges to accommodate fragile egos and toxic in-laws. We are taught that walking away makes us the villain, but protecting your peace is the most heroic thing you will ever do. Do not let anyone convince you that your boundaries are an act of war. Are you shrinking yourself right now to fit into a family that only values what they can extract from you? Have you ever had to cut off toxic in-laws to save your sanity? Drop your story in the comments below. Share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear it, and hit subscribe so we can keep building our empires together. I am Giselle, and I am finally free. See you in the next one.